Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you could take your seats. I'm Jay Nardini. I am chair-elect of the ACCT Board of Directors and a trustee at Hawkeye Community College in the great state of Iowa. Thank you for joining us this morning to advocate for community colleges and our shared mission. Many of you work closely with the Department of Agriculture. We hope that this morning's session will better inform your efforts and inspire new partnerships. We will hear about the department's priorities for community colleges from our speaker today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, the Honorable Thomas J. Vilsack, the 32nd U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. While the last few years have offered great challenges to supply chains, Secretary Vilsack has worked tirelessly to ensure historic investments to communities across the nation and build more resilient food systems. He is dedicated to addressing many of the barriers economic insecurity creates for community college students so that they can attain the skills they need to redefine their futures. Under Secretary Vilsack's leadership, the USDA invested over $2 billion to help close the digital divide in rural America, helping better connect rural communities to job opportunities and distance learning. The department has also invested in improving rural resilience to droughts, floods, wildfires, climate change, and improving waterways. More recently, the USDA secured funding in the December Omnibus Bill for the creation of a permanent nationwide summer EBT program to ensure kids receive healthy meals year-round. This will greatly alleviate financial stress for our student parents. The bill also included increases for rural housing programs to fund expiring rental assistance contracts, the creation of multifamily housing, and the expansion of tribal housing relending demonstration programs. Secretary Vilsack understands the importance of investing in our communities and that we must expand our economy from the bottom up and the middle out. As a fellow Iowan, I am proud to have him here in the nation's capital. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the former mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, a senator in the Iowa legislature, and two-term governor of the state of Iowa, and currently his second term as Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Vilsack.
Jay, thanks very, very much for that kind introduction, as well as for your career as a lawyer in Iowa and your willingness to leave the practice of law and continue to volunteer for your community is certainly something that is to be emulated, and appreciate your role in helping Hawkeye Community College continue to grow and flourish. I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who was in attendance here today, because you are all part of a community college system and advocating on behalf of community colleges that are essential to the transformational moment that we have here in the United States. What community colleges do every single day is to provide convenient, affordable, and meaningful educational opportunity for so many people across this great country. And you are really pivotal to this very incredibly important moment that we have in this history of our great country. You see, President Biden really does believe, as Jay indicated, that the strength of our country lies in the middle class. And community colleges are committed to growing that middle class by giving people the technology, the information, the access to certifications, degrees that allow them to go into the workplace and be able to contribute to a growing America. So you are very, very important to the future of this country, and we are at a place where we are literally transforming the economy of this great country. The transformation is occurring because we're transitioning to a clean economy. We're transitioning to a rebuilt infrastructure, a modernization of that infrastructure by virtue of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which President Biden has led and Congress passed. This is an incredibly important moment, and USDA is right in the middle of it. So while I want to talk to you for just a minute about nutrition and the important role that our nutrition programs play for the students that attend community colleges across this great country, I also want to spend a minute or two of your time talking about the important role that you can play with us in transforming the rural economy. Now, I know that you all are very interested in the SNAP program, and you understand and appreciate that many of your students find themselves in some circumstances as parents of young children. And the SNAP program offers them an opportunity to continue their education and at the same time be able to meet the needs of their family. As you know, when the healthcare emergency declaration gets lifted later this spring, the SNAP program is in fact going to change a bit for community colleges. In the past, during the pandemic, we waived the requirement that students had to be at least half-time to be able to qualify for SNAP. That qualification, that requirement is going to come back into play. And emergency allotments are ending, and so the level of SNAP benefits will be reduced. But the opportunity that was afforded in the omnibus bill that Jay mentioned is the creation of a full-time permanent summer feeding program. So families that are currently engaged in community college education will have that opportunity to have not only the school meal program, but an extension of that, if you will, during the course of the summer months. So it's going to be important for you all to understand that, but I also know that you have students that have young children, and they benefit from the WIC program, the Women and Infant Children program. Unfortunately, only 50% of those who qualify for the program are currently engaged and enrolled in that program. And I think community colleges have an opportunity to ensure that their students are aware of the WIC program and take full advantage of the supplemental opportunity that those families have to receive assistance with fruits and vegetables and other nutritious foods, to be able to make it just a little bit easier to get through the month. There's also an opportunity from an employment perspective. We're modernizing the WIC program as part of our nutrition security effort. We want to increase access to benefits. We want to make sure that people have access to healthy and good foods. We want to make sure that there's equity involved in this. And that involves making sure that we are available to people where they are. So we're helping to train a workforce. Working with colleges and universities and community colleges across the country, we want to train those folks who will be public health folks, folks who will be working in hospitals and community centers and schools that can provide information and access about the WIC program. So I'm here today to solicit your help and assistance in working with us to continue the modernization of this important nutrition program and make sure that the students who could benefit from it and their families have access to it. There's no reason for those who have culinary programs, while that culinary program couldn't also include perhaps informing students about WIC and maybe even partnering with the local WIC office to provide opportunities of information and technical assistance so the folks can sign up and participate. Now, I mentioned that community colleges are pivotal to the transformational nature of our economy today. This clean economy, this economy that's responding to the climate change, offers exciting possibilities for rural places. And I think the community colleges will play an incredibly important role. So what we've done at USDA is we've taken resources, about $3 billion, and we basically said and challenged American agriculture and partnerships in which American agriculture works with universities and colleges, and community colleges, with environmental groups, with conservation groups, with farm and commodity groups, with food companies, with retailers. We said, what would you do with these resources in order to make American agriculture a leader in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon and creating new opportunity out of the climate challenge? We received over 1,000 applications, over $20 billion in requests, a tremendous response. We were able to fund 141 projects. These are projects that cover every major commodity in all states across the country. We anticipate and expect that maybe 60,000 or more farmers will participate in this effort, and we fully expect roughly 25 million acres of American farmland to be engaged in the activities of figuring out how best to deal with a changing climate. Now, where do community colleges fit into this? Well, first of all, it's going to be necessary for us to monitor the performance of these projects to be able to measure the benefits of certain climate-smart practices in both agriculture and forestry, a way of measuring the greenhouse gas reductions and measuring the amount of carbon that's being sequestered. We anticipate nearly 60 million metric tons of carbon will in fact be sequestered, which will allow American agriculture to begin the process of creating international leadership in this role of climate-smart practices. That measurement will also have to be verified and reported, and so those are a broad array of new job opportunities that community colleges can think about in terms of preparing that workforce that you prepare to be involved in these projects. So I would encourage you to learn more about our climate-smart agriculture and forestry commodity partnership program. The idea behind this is to create climate-smart commodities and then be able to allow producers and forested landowners to receive the benefit of a value-added opportunity because consumers are demanding that their food and their products be climate-smart. And now we have the opportunity here with these programs, with these partnerships, to be able to really embrace climate-smart practices. It's going to require drones and sensor. It's going to require contracting. It's going to require a lot of the types of work and jobs that you're preparing your students for. So if you can get connected to one of these partnerships in your area, if you can participate in it, then you'll benefit not only financially, but your students will have an incredible experience, and they'll be prepared to be part of the workforce that will drive this agenda forward. So that's one critical component of where community colleges can partner with the Department of Agriculture. It's an exciting opportunity. Another exciting opportunity is the competition agenda. You know, the reality is we've seen a great deal of consolidation that's taken place in agriculture and in the food business and the processing business. And so the President has directed the Department of Agriculture to work aggressively to use resources to expand capacity, processing capacity for meat and poultry, an opportunity for more market opportunities for farmers and producers to get a fairer price. Well, when you think about it, you think about all the jobs that involves. As you build and expand a processing facility, there are people that have to obviously work in that facility. There are people that have to inspect the food that is being processed in that facility. Well, where are those individuals going to get the tools and the knowledge and the expertise? I think a community college has that opportunity. So being part of this processing opportunity, we've already funded 21 processing facilities that are expanding. Another 270 or so facilities are now expanding their markets beyond just selling inside their state to interstate commerce because they now have an inspection system that qualifies for federal inspection. Those are all job opportunities that are being created by virtue of investments that USDA is making. So I encourage you to take a look at what we're doing on the processing side. It's not just processing, it's also inputs. Inputs have become more expensive, and so fertilizer, for example, we have relied for far too long on the supply of fertilizer from folks who just don't, frankly, align with us. When Putin invaded Ukraine without justification, it caused a disruption in the fertilizer supply worldwide. So the President directed us at USDA to begin the process of making America more self-reliant in terms of these valuable inputs. And so roughly $500 million is going to be invested in expanding capacity to produce fertilizer and inputs here in the U.S. We've already identified 21 projects that we think are ready for investment, again, across the United States. And there will be more announcements throughout the year. So these are just several examples of the incredible opportunities that community colleges have to be part of this effort to revitalize our rural economy. What we see today in America is, especially within agriculture, is that there's a divide. We had a record year in agricultural income the last 2 years, best 2 years in agricultural income in the history of the country. But unfortunately, nearly 50% of our farmers actually didn't make money at all. And roughly 90% of our farmers rely on off-farm income as the majority of the income sources that they have. So the jobs that we can create The opportunity to create a more local and regional food system, to reduce costs, to expand capacity and competition is critically important to maintaining and expanding the number of farmers and producers in this country. And community colleges can be part of that initiative, helping us to build that local and regional food systems, helping us to lower input costs, helping us to expand opportunity for new income sources, whether it's climate-smart commodities or whether it's qualifying for an ecosystem service market by virtue of the fact that you're helping to measure and quantify the results of climate-smart practices, whether it's converting agricultural waste into a whole series of fabrics and fibers and materials and chemicals and fuel. The opportunity is just simply unlimited to reform, to transform, to change, to revitalize the rural economy. And I think community colleges play a critical role in that. So whether we're supporting your students as they get that education with nutrition assistance, helping their families have access to nutritious food, or whether it's giving you the opportunity to partner with the USDA and other federal agencies to help create this transformed economy that will support folks who work not just with their head but also their hands. And that's a critically important opportunity for this country. So let me finish where I began. So I know there are questions. Let me finish where I began with a thank you. I know every single day there are folks associated with the community college system, whether it's those who teach, those who administer, or those who provide leadership on boards across the country, that are figuring out every single day how to expand the mission, how to enhance the mission, how to finance the mission, how to explain to the rest of the country the significance and importance of the mission of community colleges. So I'm really pleased to be here today to thank you for all that you do to make this extraordinary opportunity available to so many of our people in this country. So thanks very much for what you're doing. Jay, if these questions aren't too difficult, I'll be happy to answer them. And again, thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Secretary Vilsack. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty impressed the fact that he spoke from no notes. So he obviously knows what he's talking about. So we're going to have an opportunity now for some questions. And we'll begin our question and answer portion of the program. We're going to take questions from some colleges that are engaged with USDA programs. And our first question is from Steve Anderson, who is a trustee from Northeast Community College in Nebraska and a leader in the Community College Alliance for Agricultural Advancement. Steve? As soon as we get the mic going, we'll get our question.
Okay. Okay, you can hear me. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vilsack. My question is, my college is part of an agricultural alliance called the Community College Alliance of Agricultural Advancement. Representing institutions across the Midwest, we have a unique relationship with USDA, including a cooperative agreement with NRCS to teach current and future producers, our students, of how to apply best management practices on the ground in conservation planning and precision agriculture. How do you leverage these type of relationships, increase the adoption of climate-smart technologies and practices amongst our producers and agricultural technicians?
Well, this is a great question. It offers me an opportunity to reinforce the comments that I made about the Climate Smart Agricultural Partnership. That's precisely what we're doing with this partnership. It's an opportunity to see a broader utilization of climate smart practices and to learn what works and what doesn't work. While we're doing that, the NRCS, which is our conservation service, will also be working with individual producers through the regular programs that USDA offers, our EQIP program, our conservation stewardship program, our regional conservation partnership program, to basically also reinforce the important role of roughly 45 different practices that are climate smart. And so it's really an opportunity for the students that are in the colleges that are involved in this alliance to be able to learn about the process. And then here's what I hope they do. I hope they come work for USDA. And here's why I hope they work for USDA. Because only 7 to 8% of our workforce at USDA is under the age of 35. there are roughly 50% of the workforce that look like me. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. We really have a workforce that is at or near retirement, and we really do need to attract young people who are excited and interested in being part of this transformational moment that we have in American agriculture. So we have a number of ways in which they can intersect, and would certainly encourage, obviously, the cooperative agreement to continue, because we very much value, and that cooperative agreement, by the way, is one of roughly 80 or so that NRCS has across the country doing exactly what you're doing in the Midwest.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that question. Our next question will be from Monty Sullivan, Louisiana Community and Technical College System President. LCTCS is a current participant in ACCT's SNAP Education and Training Program. Monty?
Yes. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your comments today, and really is impressive to see you speak from the heart about America's community colleges and the role that we play in, as you framed it very well, this critical moment for our nation. SNAP E&T has become, education and training has become a critical part of the work that we are doing in interfacing with our students and ensuring that they have the benefits that they need in order to be able to show up at school, to learn, but also to be able to take care of their children. Can you talk a little bit about the possibility of expansion of SNAP education and training benefits, as they played such an important role throughout this last few years around the pandemic? I just wondered if there's an opportunity for expansion.
Well, thanks for that question. And this education and training opportunity not only helps to benefit students to know what the program is, but also to encourage states to work with community colleges and others to be able to train these young folks to be able to go into the workforce at some point in time and be able to and make a good living. Here's my concern about your question. I'd love to say to you that we're looking at a significant expansion of E&T. I'd love to be able to tell you that. But the reality is today, right now, here in this city, there's really a lot of conversation about actually reducing our commitment to SNAP. The reality is when folks talk about a cut of the federal budget, I'll just use this opportunity to sort of educate you all about how this works. The federal budget has two components. It has a mandatory component, it has a discretionary component. The discretionary component basically is that part of the budget where Congress has some leeway in terms of being able to determine how much is appropriated. When people talk about a $130 billion cut, and you'll hear that number circulated today here in Washington, $130 billion, you assume that it applies to the entire federal budget, the discretionary part. Well, it doesn't really, because nobody wants to cut defense. So defense is a big part of that discretionary budget. Nobody's going to want to cut aid to veterans. I mean, we have a responsibility to take care of those folks. So when you take those two things off the table, there's not a whole lot left in that discretionary budget. So then you look at significant cuts. In the case of the Department of Agriculture, it could be anywhere from 20 to 25% of all of our budget, of our discretionary budget. So it's really hard for me to talk about expansion of programs at a time when the conversation here is how do we peel it back? And part of the challenge, I think, frankly, is for people in this town. You all understand this. That's why you invited me here today. But folks in this town don't fully appreciate and understand what the Department of Agriculture does. So over the last 10 years or so, the discretionary budget, non-defense, has increased by roughly 28%. But USDA's budget's only increased 14%. So that means that some departments of government got a pretty hefty increase while we just basically limped along in terms of inflation. So our challenge is always to be efficient and effective with the resources we have, but it's also to lift up what USDA does so that policymakers understand and appreciate it's important to invest in the department because of the broad reach of the department. I mean, I could spend your entire conference today talking about the various aspects of the USDA. I mean, we're in 70 to 80 countries because of trade and ensuring the food that comes into this country is safe. You know, we're in every county in the country. We have offices, literally 5,000 offices. We have the Forest Service. I mean, we have an expansive responsibility. So I'd like to tell you we're looking at an expansion. What we are looking at is making sure that we're using those dollars most effectively and working with states to make sure they use these dollars. Because as you know, the program's administered through states, and it's frustrating to me. I get a list periodically of the states that haven't invested all of their employment and training money. So I would encourage all of you to go back home and make sure that the state is in fact putting all those resources to work. That'd be the first step.
Well, thank you for that not only informative but educational answer. And thank you, Monty, for that question. Continuing to our next question, Nan Gomez Heitzberg, a trustee from Kern Community College in Bakersfield, California, where, like many colleges, they host the Renegade Pantry to support student access to healthy foods. Nan?
Like so many of the community colleges across the United States, our students are facing the increased cost of food, and you've mentioned this, and then the challenges of making sure that for student parents, their children are fed. What we're wondering at this point is how can we better partner with USDA to ensure that those students are taking advantage and we haven't inadvertently created any barriers? Are there conversations about how we might share databases, for example, between financial aid and USDA so that our students can more easily access programs?
There are conversations about the sharing of data. I'm not sure about necessarily the financial aid piece of this, but the Medicaid, the ability to basically, if you're qualified for Medicaid, then you would automatically qualify for the SNAP benefits. And so we're looking for ways in which we can make it easier for people to apply and easier for them to utilize their SNAP payments. We're looking at the opportunity for online purchasing as opposed to in-store purchasing to make it easier. We now have over 170 retailers across the country that are allowing us to utilize SNAP with online opportunities. We're also working with farmers markets to make sure that SNAP benefits could be redeemed at farmers markets. Thousands of farmers markets now received assistance from the USDA to have the machinery to be able to process SNAP programs. You know, I would say, I mentioned the WIC program. I think it is really important for community colleges to also understand the significant opportunity that many of their students may have to participate in WIC. When 50% of them are not participating, that's really unfortunate because they would receive a broad array of fruits and vegetables and healthy foods to be able to supplement, if you will, what they're able to earn on their own or with the SNAP program. I think, secondly, I think it's important for folks to understand the link between the ability to receive a SNAP benefit so that you're taking care of your family and the continuation of your education. I mean, if you basically take the SNAP benefit away, you're essentially saying to that person, you're going to have to forego that education, you're going to have to go in the workforce, and maybe you're going to have to work a second job or another part-time job. The ability to have that SNAP payment may be the difference between whether they stay in school or don't. And we all know in this transformational opportunity and moment we have, we want young people to be well educated. And we want them to stay there. We want them to get that certification. We want them to get that training, that associate's degree that allows them to open up a whole new set of doors from an employment perspective. So we want to work with you to look for ways in which we can make it easier for people to access SNAP. We want to make it easier for them to understand the benefits of WIC, and we also want to make sure that they fully understand the summer EBT program that's going to go into effect, all of which is designed to help families get through a tough period.
Thank you. Thank you, Nan, for that question. Next up is Roberto Zarate, board chair from Alamo College in Texas. Alamo is also a participant in ACCT's SNAP E&T project.
Good morning. We're an urban site, and we do have high poverty in our city. And we have worked real hard as a board to set up advocacy centers with wraparound services, and of course SNAP is part of that. My colleagues here and asking you questions have pretty much stepped on my question. So I am concerned about the fact that they might want to downsize the program in Congress. So today and tomorrow, we're all going to be at the Capitol. What kind of message should we give our legislators in terms of the importance of the program, which is vital in terms of what we're trying to do in San Antonio?
Well, here's the pitch I'd make. Number one, the comments I made earlier, which is that these nutrition programs enable people to continue to secure the education necessary for them to have a brighter and better future. That's number one. Number two, every time someone redeems benefits at SNAP, it's not just the family that benefits, it's also farmers in this country. If you look at any major retailer, they're going to tell you that a significant percentage of their business every single day is a result of the SNAP. And think about it. If you can buy more food, you buy more food. If you buy more food, that means more food has to be available in that grocery store or online. To be available, somebody has to stock it. Somebody has to deliver it. Somebody has to package it. Somebody has to grow it. Those are all opportunities and jobs that are supported by the SNAP program. So it's not just essentially, families that are struggling. It's a lot of people in the system that benefit from this program. And I would say one other thing about this. You know, we have a great country. There's no doubt about it. We have a great country. And a lot of people talk about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as being the foundation of our great country. But let me tell you something, folks. Think about this. If you look at the world today and you look at the hot spots, the places where there are challenges and difficulties and anger and frustration and war and civil strife, what do you find? Two things for sure. One, a lot of unemployed people, and two, a lot of hungry people. In this country, we basically work to try to put folks to work and try to help them out while they're looking for work, and we provide some nutrition assistance for folks as they are transitioning. So I think part of the strength of our great democracy is having programs like SNAP. And then finally, they need to understand who's on SNAP. There's this tendency to think they're just people gaming the system. Well, here's 80% of SNAP beneficiaries are one of three types of people. They're either working moms and dads with children, working moms and dads. These are folks in the workforce, working, maybe going to school as well, trying to raise a family. Working moms and dads, people with disabilities who would probably love to work if they could, but can't, and senior citizens who worked all their life and now what they live on is a small Social Security check. Which of those folks do you really want to sort of reduce their resources? The other 20% are what are called able-bodied adults without children and without dependents. And there's a lot of focus on those folks, on the theory that, well, by golly, they ought to be working. Well, the reality is, when you're not in a pandemic, when unemployment is not real high, they either have to be looking for a job or they have to be going to school at least half-time. And if they're not looking for a job and they're not going to school, they don't get benefits for more than 3 months. So there's a lack of understanding in terms of who's actually benefiting from the program and the fact that able-bodied individuals without dependents do have a requirement and responsibility. So when you understand that, you understand the benefits of the program, you understand the connection between the program and continuing education, it seems to me that from an investment standpoint, that's a pretty good dollar that we're investing for the benefit that we get from it. And so that's how I'd explain it to members of Congress.
Yeah. I appreciate so much in your answers that you're giving us a lot of detailed information that maybe we haven't thought about before. Our last question today is from John Rainoni, President of Mountain Gateway Community College in Virginia and Board Chair of the Rural Community College Alliance.
Good morning, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. Yes, I am wearing two hats today. My first hat as college president, we have a wonderful relationship with USDA and rural development. They have assisted our forestry program and other workforce development programs. So thank you for the staff that you have and the local individuals with boots on the ground. They're really great staff. My main question really comes with my Rural Community College Alliance hat, which we appreciate that you have been a speaker in past conferences. RCCA, who is, I'm going to put a shameless plug in, is having its Rural Day on Wednesday afternoon. There's still room for you to register. We will learn from USDA and other agencies about funding and programs. But RCCA is a membership organization representing community colleges and tribal colleges, and serve the 90 million people who live in rural America. And the question is, it's a money question. I'm going to still ask it, even though basically you put a damper on it. One of our priorities as RCCA, our legislative priorities, is to assist and encourage infrastructure funding for essential programs in rural areas such as agriculture, renewable energy, and workforce development. Do you anticipate any even one-time type of funding because a lot of times we need that startup cost, we need those funds to assist the local farmers, to assist our workforce development partners?
Well, there are a couple of opportunities that arise out of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act that have workforce development components, and so would certainly encourage that. You mentioned renewable energy. There is a massive opportunity there. The Inflation Reduction Act contains a historic level of financing in two spaces. One, in the Renewable Energy for America program that basically provides resources for folks to embrace solar, wind, hydro, digesters, all kinds of renewable opportunities on the farm, in a business, in a home, in a community. And so that's a historic amount of resources available there. And then the second is that we're also working with local utilities, the rural utility services across the country, to help them decarbonize their power supply. We have a substantial amount of money under the Inflation Reduction Act that can be invested in helping them transition, basically paying them, if you will, for transitioning from a fossil fuel-based system to a renewable system. And we're talking about the ability to essentially make it financially feasible for them to make that transition. Because we know they've got a lot invested in those fossil fuel resources, so the stranded costs, helping them with stranded costs. So those are two really, really important opportunities, notwithstanding some of the challenges we may face from a budget perspective. You mentioned the workforce, and I'll finish with this, the shameless plug. I'm going to do a shameless plug again to help me make sure that the future of USDA continues to provide services to all of you, because if only 7-8% of our workforce is under the age of 35 and more people are ready for retirement, we have a workforce challenge. And there's a great opportunity for young people who want to make a difference in America to work for USDA, whether it's in their local community or whether it's in Washington, D.C., or whether it's in one of our beautiful forest or grassland areas that we manage. So would strongly encourage you all to take a look at, and encourage your students to take a look at opportunities, because we are hiring.
Thank you for that shameless plug. We've got a couple of extra minutes left. If there's anything you'd care to add that you weren't asked about. Yeah.
Well, let me just reiterate this pivotal point that we happen to be in. I mentioned the fact that we had record income, and we have so many farm families that are in need of off-farm income or aren't making money from farming. What we're doing at USDA is creating a number of new revenue streams and sources for farmers. I mean, if you think about it, farmers benefit by selling a crop or selling livestock or government payment. They're very limited in terms of how they can make money. And oftentimes they have no control over what the market bears. I mean, for example, when Putin invades Russia or invades Ukraine, all of a sudden the markets are roiled, and it just creates confusion and difficulty. So the challenge here is to figure out new ways, new revenue streams with that farm operation. So when we talk about climate smart commodity, we're talking about a more value added commodity that the market will pay a bit of a premium for. It's kind of like organic, so that customers who want to know that they're consuming dollars benefiting the environment will have that confidence. That qualifies farmers to participate in over 24 regulated ecosystem service markets. These markets are companies and industries that need an offset, need an ability to also make the case that they're climate smart. Their process may make it difficult, so they basically purchase a credit from someone else who's doing even more work on that space. Farmers can actually get to a negative carbon footprint, so they'd be able to sell, if you will, that excess credit to be able to offset a credit and activity someplace else. So there's another revenue source. The conversion of agricultural waste. There's a tremendous opportunity in sustainable aviation fuel. I often say to people, I say, you know, I get electric cars, totally get them. You know, you drive the car, if the battery wears out, you pull it off to the side of the road, you take your cell phone, you call, you get a charge, off you go. But what if you're in a plane and the battery wears out? How's that work? I'm not real confident in that yet, especially if it's over water. So we're going to need a sustainable aviation fuel, a low-carbon aviation fuel. The industry, the aviation industry, is begging for this. If you fly today, and they have the little deal at the beginning when you're telling me about the safety and all that. You know, I was on a United Airlines flight the other day, and they're telling me they're making their fuel from bananas. I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity here for a new industry that didn't exist before. And community colleges can basically train the people to make that sustainable aviation fuel, to get involved in that manufacturing process. And think about it, where is that facility going to be located? It's not going to be located in a city. It's going to be located in an urban area near the bulk, the biomass that has to be converted, whether it's woody biomass or whether it's agricultural waste. That's another revenue stream. Local and regional food systems, renewable energy. These are all new revenue sources, if you will, for farmers. So instead of 2 or 3 opportunities, you can help us create 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 opportunities. Now what that does is it creates the opportunity for small and mid-sized producers to stay in business. What does that do? Well, it increases the population of rural places. What impact does that have? Well, it keeps that local business in place, right? It allows the local school system to have enough kids. They don't have to feel like they got to merge with somebody down the road. It keeps the hospital open. And you know what? It may also increase opportunities at the community college that services that rural area. So this is tremendous opportunity to transform the country. And we should be, excuse me, we should be incredibly excited about this. I know we are at USDA, so we need partners, and no better group to partner with than folks associated with community colleges.
Wow, thank you. Well, this was an extremely informative session. Secretary Vilsack, we thank you so much for your time this morning, and let's give him another hand, please. I'm now pleased to ask Dr. Joe Schaefer to take the stage to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everyone. Trustees, presidents, and students. Hey, how about a shout out to our 2 students who stood up and asked those questions earlier this morning? If there is anything that will inspire us, it will be to hear those wonderful young folks stand up and ask something so articulate. So it is my honor to introduce one of the most visible and trailblazing secretaries of transportation history, Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg was sworn into office on February 3rd, 2021. His focus as secretary is to deliver the world's leading transportation system for the American people and economy. He has organized to achieve organizational excellence in the department's operations and to focus the department on 5 policy goals: safety, jobs, equity, climate, and innovation. In his first year at the department, he prioritized supporting the development and passage of President Biden's signature bipartisan infrastructure law. Since the law's passage, Secretary Buttigieg and his team have focused on effectively delivering the investments provided by the legislation, enabling the most significant improvements in U.S. transportation infrastructure in over half a century. The Secretary has also focused on intervening to support American supply chains dealing with shockwaves from the pandemic, including measures to help cut in half the container congestion at America's largest ports. Other major initiatives in his early tenure have included a comprehensive national roadway safety strategy to reduce deaths and serious injuries, delivery of emergency COVID-19 relief funds to transit agencies across America, and awards of over $9.5 billion in discretionary funding to enhance transportation through over 800 projects in communities across America. The first openly gay person confirmed to serve in a president's cabinet, Secretary Buttigieg previously served 2 terms as mayor of his hometown, South Bend, Indiana, go Irish, where he worked across the aisle to transform the city's future. Household income grew, poverty fell, and unemployment was cut in half. He also served for 7 years as an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, taking a leave of absence from the mayor's office for a deployment to Afghanistan in 2014. The son of Joseph Buttigieg, who immigrated to the United States from Malta, and Jennifer Ann Montgomery, a 5th-generation Hoosier, Secretary Buttigieg is a graduate of Harvard University in Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar and completed a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. He lives with his husband, Chasten, their 2 children, Gus and Penelope, and their 2 dogs. And today, ladies and gentlemen, he is here to speak to us about our national infrastructure and all matters of transportation, especially those that stand to affect our students and their futures. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for the chance to join you, and I'm not accustomed to this rousing of a welcome this early in the morning, so I admire your energy. Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer. Thank you to the Association of Community College Trustees. Thank you to the American Association of Community Colleges and everybody who's making this event happen. It's an extraordinary time for transportation in America, as you know, as you are living in your respective communities and as we are living at the US DOT. A time of enormous challenges created by economic gyrations, the after effects of the COVID pandemic, and decades of underinvestment catching up to us in forms that have been felt on everything from container shipping to passenger airline delays. But also the best time to be working on transportation in my lifetime and then some, because of the President's historic bipartisan infrastructure law and because of the shared national sense of purpose, backed by real resources to do something new and meaningful and lasting when it comes to how we safely move people and goods around the country. And so I just want to take a couple of minutes to reflect on how that connects to the work that you are leading before we get into our conversation. Let me start by thanking you for your indispensable role, collectively for our nation and individually in the communities where you lead. Saw it firsthand as mayor of South Bend. Yes, go Irish, but also go Ivy Tech. We're very proud of our excellent Ivy Tech network of community colleges who were such a key partner in preparing new generations of workers for new opportunities and preparing older generations of workers for new opportunities that were coming their way, making sure that they could thrive in the developing and changing economy of the industrial Midwest as we saw South Bend enter its comeback decade. And I am now a resident of Traverse City, Michigan, home of Northwest Michigan College. We've got some Michigan folks here. Just a few months ago, my husband Chasten walked me around the campus of NMC, pointing out how important it had been to him as a student. And in addition to having shaped my husband, it is also a key partner to the US DOT as host of the Great Lakes Maritime Academy. So just 2 examples of the institutions that I've come to know as a resident and in my role. But I've also had the great pleasure of traveling to many colleges and seeing how you are helping us to make sure that America succeeds in this transportation moment. We were at Heartland Community College in Normal, Illinois. Heartland's here too, great. So you know all about the importance of preparing students for the opportunities around electric vehicles, which are increasingly not just being bought in America, but being made in America, which is a major priority for President Biden. We're at Lehigh Carbon Community College in Pennsylvania, where fellow veterans are receiving no-cost training to get commercial driver's licenses when we need more drivers like them, and they are ready to accept that good job. In New Jersey, County College of Morris, met students being trained in, you got some amazing robots out there. I can't quite see you, but there you are. The advanced manufacturing and critical infrastructure that you were preparing students for. We were at Tri-C Cuyahoga Community College, seeing in action what it means to have the kind of transit partnership that helps make sure that you can literally keep your community running with the skills that you cultivate. This is so important because the nature of the infrastructure law, the proportions of the infrastructure law, are such that the building that we're going to do and the upgrades that we are doing right now are testing the productive capacity of the United States of America. Not just in terms of raw materials, but in terms of the human capital that you are in the business of cultivating. The President and I and everyone in the administration is thrilled about how many great paying jobs are being created that don't necessarily require four-year university degrees, but they absolutely require skills and training and kinds of degrees that are available through outstanding programming at our community colleges. Making sure that we have enough qualified people to fully deliver on this national project is also the project of making sure that we are building generational wealth that families will thrive on for generations to come. And it's especially important because we have an opportunity, again, because of the proportions of this project, to materially help to close wealth gaps in our country in this decade. Your institutions serve an above-average percentage of Black and brown low-income students during a moment when our department and many state DOTs and unions are actively recruiting to make sure that this generation of carpenters and electricians and operating engineers look like and represent all of America. You have been so thoughtful about how to make sure working parents, working mothers are able to build their skills and ladder up to better paying jobs. We need to keep building the partnerships between our department, your colleges, and the transportation and infrastructure organizations that are going to be hiring like never before. That brings me to a second thing I want to make sure we talk about and think about today, which is a little bit ironic, which is that we can only train that transportation workforce of tomorrow if they are able to get transportation to job sites and to get to college, to get to your institutions, to get the skills that they need. No matter what they are studying, for college students, transportation is perhaps the most important prerequisite of all. And we've seen some illuminating new research from the Civic Mapping Initiative, which looked at community colleges and found that only 57% of primary campuses today have transit stops within working distance, but that we could make 25% of the remaining ones accessible just by extending a bus line that already exists. Just one example of the value we see that has helped motivate the Biden-Harris administration to be making the largest federal investment in public transit in the history of the United States. We are in the middle right now of getting that funding out the door. But what we really need to do is work with transit agencies on how best to use that funding. So if you're not in touch with your transit agency, I know many of you have deep partnerships with the transit agencies in your community, both supplying trained employees and helping to get your students to where they need to be. But if you don't, or if you think that you could build on that partnership, now is the best possible time to do it. You are leading one of the most important sets of institutions in our country, responsible for economic mobility, workforce development, civic engagement, and leadership. In short, helping to pave the way toward the American dream. And there is so much opportunity ahead that I am just delighted to have a chance to be with you and enthusiastic about what we could take great pride in later on, looking back on the 2020s and what we did together. So with that, I'll go over to my seat and join the conversation. Thank you again for the chance to be with you today.
Thank you for joining us today, Secretary Buttigieg. We'll start with a conversation and then go to the questions from the audience. So please start thinking about what you might want to ask the good Secretary. Secretary, often when people think of community colleges and the federal government, the Departments of Education and Labor come to mind. How do colleges interact with the Department of Transportation for both access and workforce readiness?
So let me build out a little more on what we were saying about access. You know that so many of the students that you're reaching are getting onto a pathway that is not just an inheritance, a multi-generational pattern of being in the same trade or having the same skill or going to the same university, but people who are trying to do something that is new to them in either whether they're mid-career or whether they're coming out of high school. And there's a very literal sense in which navigating that is difficult. Obviously, navigating FAFSA and navigating apprenticeship programs and some of the many things that my colleagues at Department of Education, Department of Labor work on are important, but also, whether a student feels and is equipped and ready and well served in just literally getting to where they need to be. I think is one of the most important obligations we have as the federal agency that is funding so many transit agencies in our community. And I would even go a step further and say not only is this a question about transit in the short to medium term, this is actually a question about land use and planning in the medium to long term. So as you're setting out your capital plans, think about how the built environment of the communities that you're in, whether we're talking about a dense city or whether we're talking about a rural campus, might look different when we come to the other end of the evolution in post-COVID commuting patterns, when we enter a period where autonomous vehicles are playing more of a role, when we see the different models for transit and transportation really take hold according to more of a 2050 pattern than a 1950 pattern. These are things that are very much within the lifetime of some of the decisions that community college leaders are responsible for making right now. So those are some of the things that are on my mind. And then there's the more direct partnerships that we have. Our grant programs are very focused on the workforce piece because, again, we won't succeed without it. And so it is not just we want to make sure we help you succeed, but we're counting on you to help this mission of rebuilding America succeed.
Thank you. I come from beautiful Rocky Mountain West, but we serve very, very rural and desperate populations, and so very passionate about what we're doing in rural America. And the irony isn't lost on me that the very departments, agencies that need help with the workforce to keep the roads open and going are also the very barriers that keep many of our populations from coming to college and actually pursuing those careers and those opportunities. And so appreciate your focus on transportation, appreciate your focus on helping those populations achieve their dream by having the opportunity to actually come to campus, without a doubt. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the Department of Transportation is leading the implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Law. Two areas of that law are interested to community colleges. Two areas of that law interested to community colleges. In order to be successful in that implementation, a trained transportation workforce is needed. How can community colleges contribute to that effort?
So many of you have explicit partnerships either with industry or with transit agencies near you. If you don't, I would encourage you just to do a little bit of a fact-finding mission with your nearest transit agency, with your state DOT, to see what they think how the needs are likely to unfold. And I think of this in particular in terms of the shifting tasks that are going to come with some of the shifting technologies. Give you a good example. We are investing in unprecedented terms in helping transit agencies to acquire zero and low emission buses. Now, just like a diesel bus, it needs to be worked on, but unlike a diesel bus, it's very different equipment and requires a lot of training, a lot of sophistication, a lot of skills. So we actually have a 5% set aside within the low and no emission bus program, where if we're buying your community a bus or 10 buses, at least 5% of that needs to go into workforce development. And there's a good chance that your transit agency maybe hasn't had that experience of putting together a transit-oriented workforce development program of that kind. Maybe you haven't had that experience either, but now's the time to look into it. because you can team up. So that's just one. That's part of what we're looking at Tri-C. So that's just one sliver of it. But the bigger issue I'm trying to get across here is that these partnerships need to happen, but that doesn't mean they'll happen on their own. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take planning into the future. Many, if not most of you, are guided by state legislators or state governments that themselves have a lot at stake in terms of how this infrastructure law moves out. Look, we're very proud of this federal legislation with federal money pushed and moved and signed by the president and by the Congress. But actually, for every dollar that we're picking and choosing in a discretionary program in my building, there are many, many more dollars that are going out to the states by formula. They, too, are dealing with an extraordinary growth in what is expected of them, in the resources they have to do it with. There needs to be a matching growth in the readiness of the workforce. And you might want to explore whether the folks whether it's your best allies in the state legislatures, or whether it's in communities or the private sector, or the folks who think most about transportation and construction and the folks who think most about workforce and training are talking to each other. And so often, you're the only person that both of them know. It just has to do with the role that community college leaders play in their communities. You will have deep relationships and a kind of visibility across industry that can see from construction to transportation to government, public sector, education, and might even in some cases be well positioned to convene that conversation if you don't think somebody else is. And we would welcome that and support that any way we could.
Great, fantastic. Continuing with the infrastructure law, it also includes federal funding to improve equitable access to public transit. How can community colleges leverage these funds to remove the transportation barriers for some of our students?
There we go. So there's a real need to make sure that students are physically able to get to where they're going. And here too, because I know how effective community college leaders often are in connecting the dots between the pipeline of skill training you're doing and the pipeline of jobs waiting on the other side, would encourage you to think in an integrated way about what a student's needs are going to be. The last thing you want to do is solve the problem of getting them to the campus and then not have an answer for them when they're leaving the campus and hoping to get these great paying jobs, and then wondering why a year or 2 years out, not nearly as many of your graduates took hold in that employer as you had hoped or planned, right? So this calls for thinking more than one piece at a time. But part of what we have in mind when we're funding transit agencies to do this work is to make it easier, make it affordable. Some agencies are experimenting with fare-free travel. A lot of you will have arrangements like Ivy Tech did in South Bend where it's not universally fare-free, but it is for students. Finding ways to just take that cost, take that complexity, take that confusion off the table is huge. The other thing I would mention, you went through our top 5 policy priorities: safety, climate, jobs, equity, innovation. One form of innovation I find very interesting is where many local transit authorities, instead of just viewing the kind of Uber, Lyft style transportation technology as something that will always come at the expense of transit when it comes to last mile, to actually embrace and use it themselves. Dial-a-ride services could be much more efficient if there were an easier way to summon them, and the technology exists. It's what companies like Uber and Lyft use every day. And I've seen very creative transit agencies, Kansas City is one, look at this. So just one more example of something that I think it would be helpful for community colleges to be at the table at. Because the bottom line is you have to literally get people to these opportunities. And then, of course, there's the digital side, right? I don't know if anybody's totally figured out what this new normal is going to be, even now. But we know that we're not going back to 2019. And just as we're working on it at the policy level, and for that matter, just as an employer of 55,000 people, we want to stay in touch with you as you're working through educational models that acknowledge that there are some things that you just plain have to be around other people to do, and yet that we, as of now, have not done everything we could to use remote and digital learning as efficiently as we one day will.
Thank you. Fascinating, especially the innovations around using what the commercial side. The private sector is sort of driven around transportation and applying that to public transportation. I look forward to hearing more innovations that emerge in that space. Before I start my next question, I'd like to ask the audience to start making their way to the microphones. We have them placed in the room. If you have a question for Secretary Buttigieg, please start making your way there. Secretary, last Congress, President Biden also signed the Inflation Reduction Law, which included the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program, which allows community colleges to partner locally to build transportation in a way that reconnects our communities. Can you share some examples of how community colleges can partner locally to dismantle some of those other transportation barriers?
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It will be a companion to the Reconnecting Communities program, which is about $1 billion program in the infrastructure law. And this is about confronting the fact that a lot of infrastructure, especially but not only in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was built in a way that actually sliced up or divided communities. The point of infrastructure is to connect, but we know that it didn't always work out that way. And often those divisions happened on racial lines. I don't raise this problem or this issue in order to wallow in it. I raise it because we can do something about it. And sometimes that is a massive physical infrastructure project like Detroit, where we're investing $100 million in taking a section of I-375 that cuts like a gash, wiped out the neighborhoods of Paradise Valley and Black Bottom when it went in, and can now be elevated and turned into a boulevard. And really transform what the community is like. In Atlanta, there's a vision that we're funding some of the planning of to stitch over a similar underpass. Other places, it could be a much more modest intervention. It's not about taking a giant highway and plunging it underground. It's about an overpass over a rail line that created a so-called wrong side of the tracks, but doesn't have to be that way. Or it could even be a transit link. The point is to be creative about how you link where there have been divisions in the past. And again, I see community colleges playing a really important and encouraging role here, not just in the community conversation, the policy conversation, bring some of the data you have about how people have been separated from the educational opportunity that equals economic opportunity because there's literally something in the way. But also, because your own capital planning might sometimes intersect with a community, literally. See what I did there? It's very hard not to make a transportation pun when you break it down. But might intersect with a community vision that in turn might be applying for federal funds. And I got to tell you, I mentioned we have a lot of discretionary funding right now. I mean, billions of dollars. We've done, I think, 1,800 projects so far. One way that a city or a state DOT can make their application in these extremely competitive processes more convincing is to demonstrate that they have partnered with their local educational institutions to help break down barriers. So you're helping them and helping a community help itself if you get involved in that process, and I hope many of you will. I know many of you have. I hope more of you will.
Mr. Secretary, I know we've got some questions, but the conversation about inflation and your comments about capital plans bring this up. I'm going to go off script a little bit and make all these wonderful people up here a little nervous as I do so. So one of the interesting things about what we're struggling with right now is the greater pressures on community colleges, from funding streams, from the support, and as we try to invest in our own capital enterprises, our own capital instructions, as we look to build out, renovate, modernize our programs, the impacts of inflation and supply chain are hitting us, and they're hitting us hard. And the problem with that is it is pulling funds away from those direct provision of things to our students to pay for rapidly escalating construction costs, these cost delays because of supply chain challenges. And I know you've really been a champion in trying to remove those barriers and help us, get quicker time to market. I don't know if you have any comments just in general about what you're doing around supply chain issues and helping with some of those challenges.
Yeah, no question. This is a huge challenge for anybody trying to do anything, whether you're trying to build a bridge or whether you're trying to build out a new satellite campus. And it's part of why we've been very focused on, first of all, addressing the infrastructure deficits that have led to those supply chain crunches, partly to begin with. Secondly, to tackle inflation itself, we're glad to see it coming down. There's more to go there. But also making sure that we stay ahead of anything that could cause a project to take longer than it should, because time is always money, but time is definitely a lot of money when you're in an inflationary environment where a year added to the length of a project is also something you can measure in many, many zeros added to the cost of that project. The best thing I think we can do as a department to help with that is to work with local project sponsors on lining up everything well in advance, including the community conversation and the environmental process that has to happen. Do it right, do it first, do it once, and don't get wrapped around the axle halfway through, because those inflationary pressures, which are a problem throughout the process, are at their most acute when the process is taking longer than it should.
Great answer. All right, maybe we can bring up the lights slightly. It looks like we've got quite a few folks that have some questions. Why don't we start over here far on the left? If you would introduce yourself, young lady, tell us where you're from, and then ask the secretary your question.
Good morning. My name is Kara Sullivan. I'm the student trustee from the Alamo Colleges District in San Antonio. So something that stands out when we're talking about community colleges is the fact that they are made for the community. I know that in my district, we have partnerships with employers in the manufacturing and automobile industries. We ask them what technical training would prepare students to be employed by you. So my question is, how do you see the Department of Transportation investing in the technology needed by community colleges to prepare future members of the transportation industry?
Well, great question, Kara. First of all, let me applaud your institution for having a student trustee role. I think that really contributes to good decision making. And the question you're asking is so vital because we're talking about a field that is going through enormous change, whether we're talking about construction generally or transportation specifically. Huge changes are coming in the 2020s. And being a step ahead of those, being ready to work with these technologies, put them to use, is going to be, frankly, one of the big deciders of whether America maintains our competitive edge relative to the rest of the world in our lifetime. And the best community colleges, I think, have found effective ways to get that feedback cycle from industry that is building out into, it may be new automation strategies, it may be new materials, but whatever is something that requires new forms of skills. And feeding that back into the curricula and into the training that happens, and then making sure that you follow up and see if that has served graduates well as they go into these jobs. From a DOT perspective, we try to be, how can I put this? We try to be aggressive and humble at the same time about technology. And what I mean by that is we try to be aggressive in the sense of funding good research. And by the way, we have a whole network of partnerships with university transportation centers that do a lot of this research with federal dollars. And pushing forward in terms of our own rules and regulations and standards. And things like that set aside I was mentioning when we're funding transit agencies to say, hey, you got to spend some of this money on workforce development. Find a partner like a community college and work on that. But we try to be humble at the same time, and what I mean by that is knowing that we're not going to always correctly guess what the most important transportation technologies will be. I remember being at a convening here in Washington as chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Task Force on Automation 7 years ago, when we were being told that the widespread use of self-driving cars would happen 7 years, it would be 7 years away. And I think 7 years from now, we might still be talking about it. Don't get me wrong, those developments are coming, but not at the pace we thought. Meanwhile, I would argue, of all the things that are going on with propulsion and vertical takeoff and landing and drones and artificial intelligence, the most important transportation technology of the last decade turned out to be the smartphone. It's not even a vehicle. And yet it changed the way you get around, the way you navigate, the way you get a car, right? And so we're trying to make sure we are flexible and helping institutions and students be flexible with the skills that are going to matter, even knowing that some of the very specific expectations around those skills might evolve. And that's why also programs that do a form of badging and credentialing that can kind of turn over so that what you learn now on one form of electric vehicle will be something you can bolt on another credential to in 6 years when another element of it comes up, is something we want to be supporting too. We're not going to figure it all out in Washington. We don't have all the answers at the DOT, but more of the funding should be coming from Washington. That's what we're trying to get out to the communities right now.
Thank you.
Great question. Why don't we go here to the middle? Please, sir. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. My name is Jerry Voxlach. I am a representative from the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. Like many students, I don't drive, so transportation issues especially hit home to me. But I'll get to my question. Has your department found evidence of the student needs for transportation change as classes increasingly turn to an online format?
Great question, and something that's very much on our mind. I'll be honest, we don't know yet in many ways, whether we're talking about commuting patterns or whether we're talking about student needs. And of course, for so many community college students, there's an overlap there because there are so many working students in our community colleges who encounter the system as commuters and as students. We know certain things. We know that transit is always going to matter. We know that communities do better and countries do better when residents can get to where they need to go, whether they have a car or not. You shouldn't have to have 2 tons of metal with you in order to get to where you're going. And creating that level of freedom depends on the choices we make about what's available, what's affordable, and what's safe. Theoretically, you could ride a bike just about anywhere, but if it isn't safe, people aren't going to do it. And you can't ask people to do it if it isn't safe. And what excites me is that we do have ways, for example, with some of the arrival of rideshare technology being used by transit agencies, to not just rely on a hub and spoke system of 40-foot buses in every size community, regardless of its layout or its needs. But we're still seeing how some of these things unfold. So I believe we'll probably be more in the middle of this decade before there's been an equilibrium in terms of how commuting patterns and student patterns have settled after everything that got thrown by COVID. Because we learned 2 big things, right? At least this is my take on it. The first big thing we learned is the incredible capacity of tools like Zoom to bring us together, to get things done, to have meetings take place that didn't require to be twice as long in terms of how much time somebody took to participate in them because they had to go across town. And on the other hand, we learned that you can't do everything on Zoom, that actually the longer you rely on that, whether we're talking about a classroom dynamic or certainly an office dynamic, the more you start to see the subtle cost of not having body language and little conversations on the way in and out, and the little things that create a community, whether we're talking about a community of colleagues at work or a learning community. But maybe there are ways to create that aren't the same as pushing everybody into the same room in the ways that we used to. I think it would be, it just wouldn't be true to say that we know yet how that's settling out. So what we're doing right now is actively trying to gather as much data as we can to learn and to watch and to see what will happen so we can make better decisions for the back half of this decade.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Great question. Go over here to the middle, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ledina, and I am the Hudson Valley's Community College student trustee in New York, Troy, New York, and I'm an international student as well. So my main focus is electrical vehicle, which is an industry that is quickly expanding. How is that affecting the transportation and infrastructure department, and how is the department supporting this industry?
One of my favorite subjects. So,
mine too.
Good, and we're going to need more like you developing expertise in this area because this is where the automotive industry is going. Now, some people have asked, if this is where the automotive industry is going, why are you spending so much effort trying to push it? But the reason why there's been a lot of legislation and a lot of activity around electric vehicles for us is that while we think EVs will be the future no matter what, there are 3 things that we think are not guaranteed. 1, will adoption happen quickly enough to help us meet our climate change goals that are so important to this country and to the world? 2, will this be available to people on equitable terms? Right? The first EVs were luxury items, but one of the most exciting things about EVs is that people can save money on gas, and the lowest income drivers are the ones who have the most on the line in that being affordable. 3, will this be a revolution led by America? And that's very important to President Biden, that we're creating American jobs on American soil with this EV revolution and not having our biggest international competitors like China lead the way and have us racing to catch up. The answer to those 3 questions depends on a lot of things. It depends on making them affordable. That's why the Inflation Reduction Act took $4,000 off the cost of many used EVs and $7,500 or more off the cost of many new EVs. It's a matter of charging, and that's why we are partnering with the Department of Energy to create a nationwide network of chargers so that you never go more than 50 miles without hitting a charger. Now, that's easy in DC. You can't go more than 50 yards without hitting a charger, but I'm guessing in Wyoming, that's a little more complicated. And even in a place like DC, the private sector may not be installing chargers in certain areas where it is not yet profitable, even though their availability in, let's say, a multi-family apartment building with lower income residents could be a real game changer. So we're investing heavily in getting charging networks out in the states and partnering with the states to do it. So affordability, chargers, materials and components. And we got to make sure that there is a made in America, or at least US friendly supply chain for more of the process of getting these batteries put together. This conversation will transform many communities as we build refining capacity. But the other thing that's really going to matter is skills, as you all. It's making sure that we have a workforce prepared to continue designing, building, making, maintaining, operating these electric vehicles, whether we're talking about a car, whether we're talking about a bus, eventually a truck. Those are starting to come online. And that human capital piece is going to be very important to it as well. I'm very excited about what we can do with EVs, but it won't develop the way we need it to as a country if we don't all work on it together.
That is true. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Let's go over here again.
Hi, I'm Samantha Vave from Lansing Community College. I'm on the Board of Trustees. And when we're in places like New York or DC, the public transportation is incredible. But where I live in Lansing, it's pretty bus dependent. And when I first moved there, I was told, don't ride the bus, it's not safe for women. Yet many of our students are dependent on the bus. So my question to you is, how do we make our transportation, our public transportation, safer while reducing the stigma around using it?
Such a great question. And it begins with safety, of course. Safety and the perception of safety, which are both real but are distinct. And we have been in a lot of dialogue with transit agencies around the country on how to make sure we are reinforcing both the reality and the perception of safety on board. There's a chicken and egg thing here, right? Which is actually often in these contexts, the thing that makes you feel safest is other people. And the thing you most need in order to drive ridership is a feeling of safety. So much as was the case with Midwestern downtowns generally, just the city, I would say it's also true at a bus station or a bus itself, which is the more you see just people around doing their thing, the more you feel comfortable and safe. And I think that also gets to culture. You mentioned this stigma and this idea that buses are only for people who have no choice but to ride the bus. I would say buses are for anybody who wants a clean, efficient way to get to where they're going, where you can read the paper, do your homework, or safely be on your phone, and can be a great alternative for a lot of people to being behind the wheel. But for that to work out, it's got to be frequent, it's got to be reliable, it's got to be clean, it's got to be safe. And this is one of the reasons why we are undertaking that largest ever, again, can't say it enough times, the biggest federal investment in transit in history. But it's not just the funding, right? It's that conversation that transit should be a means of choice. I heard it once said that somebody posed the question: is a really civilized, well-off place one where even the poorest person has a car, or is it a place where even the richest person feels comfortable taking the bus or the subway? And if you're in New York, or maybe it's not so unusual to see a millionaire on a subway car because it's literally just the best way to get somewhere and the fastest. But in places like where you and I live, in Michigan, it doesn't always feel that way. And I think we need to cultivate, and by the way, community leaders, as many of you are, can also lead by example on this. Spend some time on the bus. You learn a lot. I learned a lot as mayor, taking the bus around. And I think that can be helpful too. But on the hard side, the kind of physical facilities and the resources for safety, we're going to do our part as the US DOT, funding agencies like never before.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, we had one more microphone back there. You guys were strategically positioned behind the podium, so thank you, gentlemen, for moving the microphone where we can see it. We do have time for one more question, so go ahead, please.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for coming. Tom Whitt from Heartland Community College. Thank you for coming to see our program. It's wonderful having you.
Really enjoyed the visit. Thanks for having me.
And my question is, obviously electric vehicles are front and center right now, so everyone knows about that. We have a manufacturer down the road, so we started a program. Are there any particular areas, transportation-related areas, that community colleges could get involved in that you think are not being covered enough? Are there any topics, industries, just anything you think is not getting enough coverage that we could get out in front of?
Yeah, great question. There's so many. I'll try not to geek out longer than I should, but let me point to a handful that I think are of interest. EVs obviously is huge and growing. So are drones. This is not just about kind of hobby stuff. Drones are going to be a more and more important part of our national aviation system in the years to come. And the skills associated with piloting them, maintaining them, I think is something that there will be more and more demand for. Artificial intelligence, we are, in my view, as a country, underreacting to just how profound these changes will be. We had a meeting a week or two ago on this, and kind of as a joke, I suggested that my team ought to just ask ChatGPT to write an artificial intelligence policy for the department. And I forgot all about it, and then they did and put it in my briefing book the next day. And it was pretty spooky how convincing it was. If they had told me that somebody had written it, I would have believed them. I know many of you are dealing with the implications of this for instruction. And again, it's hard to really say exactly what this is going to mean, but I think the most interesting thing to think about is not what it'll replace, but what it'll augment. DALL-E, have many of you seen DALL-E, this image creation program? It will maybe replace certain forms of technical drawing, but it will also create a whole new job description, which is somebody who's good at prompting this algorithm to paint a picture. Same thing with some of these chat tools. So I know it's early, but I guess finding the ways where this is already beginning to be applied and building that kernel of a set of skills, including in your instructor base, I think is going to be really important. And then, of course, there are always big things we just never know until they're upon us, which is why I think that the more soft capacity of change management and being nimble, and some of the soft skills, right, that we know are going to matter no matter what, how to deal with other people, and you find ways, whether it's particular as part of a unit or kind of threaded through your instruction to get that across. Those things we know are going to matter forever no matter what, right? So I approach this with humility because I think you rightly have a conversation with industry about what can most immediately lead to opportunities for your graduates. But I'm glad you're asking that question, and we're spending a lot of time thinking about it too, because it's fun and exciting, but also urgent that we think a couple of steps ahead. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the initiative in moving the microphone for us. So, Mr. Secretary, we are out of time. There's probably lots of other questions. I know you're a busy man. Before we wrap up, any final comments or thoughts you'd like to share with these wonderful folks?
Yeah. so much is changing, but we know that certain things, to get to pick up on the last conversation, aren't going to change. And the way that humans interact with equipment, whether it's the interaction that a driver has with her car or the interaction that somebody in construction has with the equipment that's building these new bridges we're so excited about. That relationship is important, and it's always going to be important. The most important part of our transportation systems is people. It always has been, and it's always going to be. And that's why I'm so enthused about the work that you're doing. You are preparing people to interact with their built environment, with vehicles, with infrastructure in new ways, and making sure that things that we've been doing, not just things that are completely new, like dealing with AI, things we've been doing since the days of the Egyptians, like building roads, continue to advance. And as you do it, you are at the forefront of perhaps closing some of the biggest gaps in wealth and opportunity and access that have stood between America and the American dream. I know that just like my line of work, your line of work is sometimes, by people who aren't very forward-thinking, considered a little bit unsexy, maybe. People who don't understand that what's at stake, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but what's at stake in preparing people to thrive in their careers is nothing short of demonstrating that American society can continue to be the way that most people in the world want to live. It's that big. And I hope you're just propelled by a sense of mission in that, knowing everything that gets thrown at you, from budget constraints to community expectations to the whiplash of change, and still recovering from the shockwaves of the COVID pandemic. But I really believe that this infrastructure decade we're in will be one of the most important phases that we look at across this century, not just for my line of work, but for yours. And I want to thank you in advance for your continued partnership on that, and I hope to see many, many of you in your various communities as we hit the road. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.